Tonight is our final lecture of the academic year. So for any of you who are not yet members of the C.F. Reynolds Medical History Society and would like to become members of the society, membership for a year is $10 for students, $25 for everyone else. You can join the society and pay your dues on our website. Alternately, you can send a check to our address. I will post the address in the chat shortly so that you can do that. Membership, of course, is not required, but all your membership dues go to support our wonderful speakers who are coming to deliver these excellent talks, and we're always happy to have new members. We will be commencing our lecture series again this coming fall. And we have not yet announced our slate of speakers for the coming year, but if you keep an eye on our website, you will see that forthcoming in the not too distant future. For those of you who are seeking continuing education credits, we can get those a couple of different ways. Option one, you can text the code that you see on the screen right now, JUBGEN, to 412-312-4424. You can also go to the website that you see on the screen right there. If you are affiliated with UPMC, log into your account and enter the code JUBGEN. Even if you are not intending to claim those continuing education credits, please, we would appreciate it if you would send those texts to let UPMC know that this is something that our membership is interested in. We're trying to make it clear that this is something that our membership is seeking, that there are medical professionals here who value continuing education credits that are attending these events and see the value in coming here for CMEs or CEs. So the more that people do this, the more people send those texts, the more that the university is going to be willing to sponsor providing continuing education credits for those in attendance, which is, of course, a very, very valuable thing for us to be able to offer. So please, if you're here, if you're eligible for CEs or CMEs, please send those texts, go to the website and register for that. It helps out you, it helps out everyone in attendance.
And this is good for both nurses and physicians.
Yes. You can also you can use the QR code that you see on the screen right here as well for the Catalog of Opportunities credit. This is useful for those of you who are Kristen, do you want to talk about the Institute for Bioethics for a moment here? You know more about this than I.
I mean, I can. So the Catalog of Opportunities credit is good for any Pitt undergrad who wants COO credit. We offer that for these lectures. And then we are in part sponsored by the Institute for Bioethics, which is a relatively new entity at the University of Pittsburgh, where they want to make sure that not just bioethics, but also health, humanities, and social sciences have a home. So you'll continue to see their logo pop up sometimes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We also have a strong social media presence. Harsh Hiwase is our social media liaison. We are present on LinkedIn. We have an Instagram page for the C.F. Reynolds Medical History Society. You should check out our Instagram page. We have regular posts that are going up on there. So please join. Please like and subscribe. We do like to see that, and especially in the downtimes between our lecture series, that is where you're going to find the C.F. Reynolds Society most active, and where you'll be able to see ongoing content related to the history of science and the history of medicine that is going to be maintained there, so that you can see what we're up to and what kind of things are going on here. See some fun tidbits about the history of medicine, history of nursing, and related topics in the times when we don't have speakers coming to you.
So, for instance, this is our LinkedIn page.
Now, one of our affiliate organizations, which some of you might be aware of, is the Southern Association for the History of Medicine and Science. Southern Association for the History of Medicine and Science does exactly what it sounds like it does. It's a larger society dedicated to the ongoing study of the scientific and medical humanities. And their annual conference this year, normally it's an in-person conference, but this year it is being held as a digital conference taking place at the end of this week. And I realize that's relatively short notice, but for those of you who have some time on your hands this Thursday and Friday, that conference is being hosted digitally by the Arkansas College of Health Education. You can go to sahms.wildapricot.org to register for that conference. Events are taking place during the day this Thursday and Friday, beginning at approximately 9 a.m. and going till approximately 5 o'clock p.m., both Thursday and Friday of this week. It's an excellent slate of papers with medical historians from a wide variety of areas presenting their research on a tremendous range of topics, everything from battlefield medicine during the Civil War to disabilities medicine in the late 20th century. So tremendous, tremendous variety of research being presented by scholars across many different disciplines. And if you've got some time this Thursday and Friday, I highly recommend you check it out. Registration for the entire conference is $40 for students, $60 for everyone else. So if you have time to go in and check that out, registering on their website can be done. Very, very easy to do. And if you are very interested in the history of science and medicine, presumably if you're here, that qualifies. If you are interested in developing some leadership and organizational skills, and if you plan to be in Pittsburgh in March of 2027, the Southern Association for the History of Medicine and Science will be bringing its in-person conference to Pittsburgh for the very first time next March. So we will be hosting the SAMS conference right here in Pittsburgh early March of next year. We are looking for folks to join the local arrangements committee to help organize that conference, help to do the hard work on the ground of putting together the best conference that we possibly can. And we will also be needing volunteers on the ground next March to help make the conference get off and run, to do the hard work of putting up signage, distributing badges to people when they arrive, and other nuts and bolts kind of activities to make sure that things run smoothly. So if you would like to be involved in the machinery of making this conference run, we would love to have you there. Please get a hold of us. Let us know what you want to do. We would love to have your help. And because everyone in this room is presumably part of the community of medical and science historians in the Pittsburgh area, the call for papers for SAMS 2027 will be going out in July. We would love to see the Pittsburgh medical history community well represented on the program at SAMS next year. So please, if you have a medical history topic you would like to talk about, submit your abstract this coming July whenever the call for papers goes out so you can actually be actively participating in that conference. Speaking of, another one of our affiliate organizations, the American Association for the History of Medicine, AAHM, many of you know about that one, and the American Association for the History of Nursing are both going to be holding a joint meeting, the 99th annual meeting in Buffalo, New York, from June 3rd to June 7th of this year. There's going to be it's going to be a pretty good joint session. If you are interested in participating in that, there's going to be a ride and room share matching service to help facilitate cost savings for getting there and help people find roommates if they want to room up with somebody else who is going. So if you're interested in that, then we have a Google Doc link in the comments that we'll be putting up there so that people can connect with that and hopefully help get you to that. And you can participate in this very, very good joint meeting.
Okay, I think at this point I can stop sharing and we can move on to the main feature of the night.
Okay.
Where is the stop share button? There it is. Judy, I think that's you.
This lecture this evening is dedicated to the honor of my husband, Dr. Jonathon Erlen, who was born in 1946 and died in 2022. He was the history of medicine librarian at Falk Library of the Health Sciences at the University of Pittsburgh for 35 years until he retired in 2019. He was a devoted teacher in the undergraduate and particularly the Honors College and various health profession schools. And he won the School of Medicine Curriculum Committee's Excellence in Education Award in 2004 for his month-long elective in medical history. He was an active member of the AAHM, the American Osler Society, and the Southern Association of the History of Medicine and Science, among others. And for decades, John was the linchpin of the Reynolds Society as its secretary-treasurer and pre-COVID host extraordinaire. In particular, he's remembered as a mentor to students and to up-and-coming scholars, introducing them to his colleagues and reviewing papers before presentations. If you never received an email with a list of recent dissertations that he thought you would find interesting, then you missed out on a unique gesture of friendship and scholarship. This lecture is endowed in his memory, and it's fitting that our speaker this evening hails from John's alma mater, Indiana University.
Thank you so much. Unmute myself so that you can hear me. Colin Elliott is a professor of history at Indiana University, Bloomington. He specializes in the Roman Empire's economic, social, and environmental history. He is the author of Pax Romana, the plague that shook the Roman world, which is now available in Falk Library, if you are interested in checking out a copy, as well as economic theory and the Roman monetary economy. He is currently working on a book entitled Gladiator and Tyrant, Commodus, the Last Emperor of the Pax Romana, which is a biography of the Roman Emperor Commodus, whose life offers a cautionary tale of failed leadership, squandered prosperity, and the darkness within the human soul. Professor Elliott hosts a weekly Roman history podcast on Spotify called the Pax Romana Podcast. And now I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Kristen, and what an honor it is to give this lecture. And I'm just grateful to the Reynolds Society for inviting me to do this. And of course, thanks all of you for joining me today. What I'm going to do today tonight is share with you just some of the research that I have been doing over the past few years, which culminated in the book that Kristen mentioned, Pax Romana, the plague that shook the Roman world. And the book really investigates what I think we can pretty safely say was the world's first pandemic, at least insofar as human beings sort of noticed and wrote about pandemics. This pandemic was called the Antonine plague. It struck the Roman Empire from the year 165 through at least 175 AD. It killed around, 1 to 2 million people, maybe a lot more, depending on who you ask. And the evidence that I'm going to share with you comes from all over the Roman world. So what you'll see in the bottom right of some of the slides is just a small map with a map of the Roman Empire and an area highlighted in red. And that's just so that you sort of understand whereabouts we are, because I'm guessing that not everybody in the audience knows all the different names of Roman provinces and cities and all that, but it'll just kind of give you a sense of the pandemic nature of this disease. So, like I said, I want to start off in the year AD 161. And in this year, the Roman Empire had already enjoyed almost 2 centuries of uninterrupted dominance. This was a prosperous age that was called the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana means the Roman peace. It was an age of efflorescence. It was an age of unity. It was an age of territorial dominance. The Romans ruled a territory that included parts of 3 different continents: Europe, North Africa, West Asia. And within this territory, which was about 3 million square miles, there were about 50 to 60 million people. This would be maybe 1/5, if we're optimistic, maybe 1/4 of the population of planet Earth, human population of planet Earth at this time. And one of the strengths of the Roman Empire during the Pax Romana was its connectivity. So the Romans enjoyed a very impressive road network of 250,000 miles of straight paved roads. Soldiers could use those roads. Merchants could piggyback on those roads. You could travel vast distances over land that way. Of course, also advantageous to the Romans was their maritime dominance and the Mediterranean Sea, which they called our sea, Mare Nostrum. And for about 7-8 months out of the year, the weather was calm enough, the waters were calm enough as well to allow vessels of various sizes, so small boats that might carry a person or two, and maybe an amphora of wine, to very large vessels. We're talking ships 150 feet or so in length, and it was possible to cross the entire Mediterranean Sea, sometimes in a matter of weeks. And the other benefit that the Romans enjoyed in the year 161 AD was that for the first time in Roman history, there were 2 emperors, not 1, but 2 emperors at exactly the same time. And they ruled together. So the oldest of the 2 emperors, which you see on the left of your screen there, the coin with the guy with a little bit longer beard, a little bit larger nose, that is Marcus Aurelius. You might have heard of him. He was a kind of philosopher king figure. At least that's how he was promoted. He was a Stoic. He was a visionary. He spent a lot of time in Rome preparing to be Roman emperor. And when he took over, he was sort of the senior of the 2 emperors. And then this younger, handsome guy on his right, on your right, that is Marcus's adopted brother. He's less known than Marcus, but his name was Lucius Verus. And Lucius was younger. He was a bachelor. He was an adventurer. He was close with the army and led armies while Marcus was staying at Rome. So all of this is just to say, just kind of set the scene. In the year 161 AD, Rome had really never appeared stronger. Its fortunes hadn't ever seemed brighter than they were that year. In other words, when those 2 men took over, there was really no indication that this very prosperous empire was about to be shaken by a crisis from which it would never recover. And I'm sorry to say that is exactly what happened. All right, so tonight we are going to examine how the world's first pandemic, as I call it, contributed to this world-shaking crisis. So this pandemic, however, is shrouded in mystery. It's been that way since it happened almost 2,000 years ago. Historians have not been able to determine what disease was responsible for this pandemic. How far did it spread? How many people died in this pandemic? And what role did it play exactly in the sudden collapse of this Pax Romana? So I'm going to start by telling you what we know from the standard sources, the written accounts of people who lived in the Roman Empire, either at the time of the Antonine Plague or not long after. So what was the Antonine Plague? We'll go into that. And then I want to talk about why the Roman Empire was so susceptible at this exact time to this pandemic. And not to spoil too much, but there are a couple of big surprises as I researched these questions. One of the surprises was that it turns out that the things that made Rome strong, some of the things that I just talked about, its trade connections, its connectivity, but also, of course, its military dominance, those things actually helped spread disease in the Roman Empire at this time. And the second surprise has to do with new scientific research on the ancient climate. So as climate proxies have accumulated in pretty large numbers over the last few decades, we've got a pretty good impression of what was going on in the Roman Empire in terms of atmosphere, precipitation, sunlight, a variety of other things. And as it turns out, nature seems to have had a little bit of a role in conspiring against the Roman Empire even before this pandemic begun, and it seems to have helped the pandemic along a little bit. Finally, the last question I want to address is the broader effects of this Antonine plague pandemic. So obviously we know from our own experience, I know thankfully it's more and more distant in the past, but our own experience with a pandemic is that pandemics are not just disease events. They are not merely biological. They are economic. They are social. They are cultural. They are political experiences. So a powerful pandemic can be a catalyst for changes across these various aspects of life. And these aspects can continue to change even after the disease itself has dissipated. It's important that you remember that the Antonine plague is the first time that anybody alive at the time, and probably anybody in living memory, and maybe even a lot longer before that, had really experienced something like a pandemic. It was the first time that people sort of grappled with the idea that a disease wasn't just local. It could strike anyone, anywhere, and that there was no reliable way to treat it, and that there was no escape from it. And that is truly frightening to the ancient Romans. So let's go ahead and begin with that first question. What is the Antonine plague? So if we look at the traditional sources, ancient literary sources, they begin the story of the Antonine plague in Persia. And on your screen is a map of part of what's called the Parthian Empire. The Parthians rule Mesopotamia, Media, Persia in the 160s AD. And the Romans were in the midst of a war with the Persians in the year 165. Not long after Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus took over, the king of Parthia strikes the Roman territory, and this leads to a war. And it had gone on for a couple of years, and by the year 165, the war turns in favor of the Romans. So on your screen, you see a couple of very important rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris River. The Romans marched an army down the Euphrates River. So if you follow the line down to the southeast, you will run into a couple of key cities, Ctesiphon and Seleucia. Those are both very populous cities at this time. Seleucia has 200,000-300,000 people. It's a very diverse cosmopolitan city. And the way the literary sources describe this conflict, they say that the Roman army marched down the Euphrates, sacked Seleucia, and while the soldiers were running through the streets of Seleucia, burning, pillaging, destroying, murdering, looting, while they were doing that, they ran into a shrine of the god Apollo. And some of you will probably know this. Apollo is a god of light. He is an averter of evil, but he is also a bringer of pestilence. And so this is the account that we have. Seleucia was burnt. The soldiers searching the temple of Apollo found a narrow hole. And when this was opened in the hope of finding something of value, a pestilence loaded with the force of incurable disease polluted the whole world from the borders of Persia to the Rhine and Gaul with contagion and death. So the Roman troops broke into the holy sanctuary of Apollo. They were groping around for treasures, and they get a nasty surprise in the form of a pestilence. Okay, obviously this is a fictitious story. We don't even know if there was a shrine of Apollo in Seleucia. We don't know if the city was actually gripped by an epidemic at the time the Romans sacked it. As you can see, this source is almost 2 centuries after the Antonine plague. But we do know that directly following this war in Parthia, a disease unlike anything that the world had seen swept through several cities and regions of the Roman Empire. So, what was this disease? We don't know. I wrote a book about it. I still don't know what the disease is. The Antonine plague is one of these unsolved medical mysteries. So we call it a plague, for example, but it probably wasn't the plague. That is, it probably wasn't bubonic plague. We have some scattered notes in the corpus of a very famous Greek doctor named Galen. Again, some of you, I'm sure, have heard of him, who witnessed and treated the disease. And he gives us some hints about the symptoms of the disease. So he says that when somebody caught this disease, they first had a high fever. That fever began to last day after day after day. Some victims then developed diarrhea. Their stool was blackened with blood. Galen said that if that happened, the victim was almost certainly going to die. That was the sign of a deadly case. Some victims' breath became foul. They coughed up blood. They coughed up the scabs of ulcers. Obviously, many people with the disease had insomnia, pretty hard to sleep when all of that's going on. And then the thing that Galen says that has most interested historians of medicine and disease is that some victims developed a dry pustular rash around the 9th to the 12th day of the disease. So there was bleeding under the skin. It produced blackened ulcers or pustules. They scabbed over. And then Galen says, only in one place, but he does say this, that they fell away like husks. He uses that word, like husks. And then he says that there was scarring afterwards. So now, again, I'm sure many of you lights are going off in your head. The pustular rash and the scarring sounds eerily similar to some well-known pox viruses. This disease probably wasn't modern smallpox. It sounds like there's some genetic evidence that shows that modern smallpox is just really not old enough to have been around in the Roman Empire. So the disease, despite the fact that it has some symptoms which sound like some modern diseases, is still a mystery. And all that we can really say about the disease, apart from Galen's symptoms, is that it was highly contagious and it was deadly. We see the disease have its first major outbreak within the Roman Empire in AD 161. And the source that describes this epidemic in Rome is very jarring. So the source, just to give you context for what's on your screen, Lucius Verus comes back to Rome after defeating the Parthians. He brings thousands of his soldiers, maybe that had caught this disease in Parthia, with him. And they go into Rome and they celebrate in October a triumphal parade. And this is an event with tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 or more people would have crowded the streets of Rome. There would have been a parade. The soldiers would have marched through. War captives would have marched through. After 2020, we would call this a super spreader event, I think. And the source just describes this triumphal parade, and suddenly then this sentence just immediately interrupts the narrative. It's on your screen. And there was such a pestilence that the dead were removed in carts and wagons. So there's a celebration, and then almost mid-sentence, heaps of bodies are overwhelming the city of Rome. Evidently, there wasn't much warning, and only by using carts and wagons could the victims of this disease be removed. We know from other ancient accounts of other urban epidemics that even sort of small-scale epidemics could overwhelm the limited capacity of the city resources for dealing with just the corpses alone. The bodies were such a problem for the city of Rome that normally these citizens who were very careful and quite respectful about funerary rites and burials, suddenly all of those protocols and rituals were just bypassed. It was common for survivors to just toss corpses wherever they could go, in the Tiber River, in the bushes, stuff them down the sewers, throw them into the tombs of other families. Um, Adding to the chaos was loss of life among Rome's wealthy elites. So if you read the rest of this source, we read that thousands were carried off by the pestilence, including many nobles, for the most prominent of whom Marcus Aurelius, erected statues. So these were people, by the way, who were not just sitting around being wealthy and owning land. It was their job in a crisis to distribute food. They were honor bound to do this. And even a few elite deaths in the city of Rome or other Roman cities would have left thousands of people without aid. So if the body count in Rome was as high as this source suggests, which it says thousands were carried off by the pestilence, it's easy to imagine that civility itself in the city of Rome probably was abandoned. But in this really dark time in Rome and sort of unexpected crisis, we see in the rest of this source that Marcus sort of took a leadership role. So the last sentence here, such too was his kindliness of heart that he had funeral ceremonies performed for the lower classes, even at public expense. So Marcus Aurelius did a few things. He provided some funds for memorial services for the plague victims. And obviously we see that he erected statues for the elites. Up in the first sentence of the source, we also read that the two emperors ratified certain stringent laws on burials and tombs. And we have a law corpus that was preserved in the 6th century AD, which records a great number of laws that the emperors promulgated over the history of the Roman Empire. And some of those laws, indeed, are laws of Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus that do indeed regulate burials. So this source, despite the fact that it's written a little while after the plague and is a kind of a notoriously problematic source, it's written at least in the 4th century AD, so a while, it seems to be believable, at least in this respect. It is accurate about what Marcus Aurelius actually did after this outbreak. So Marcus was not only helping to rid the city of bodies, but he was reminding the Romans of their dignity. Really fantastic leadership during a pandemic. Due in part to the pandemic that hit Rome and then began to spread out, the emperors had to stop some of their foreign policy plans. So they had planned to deal with a set of invasions, and you see those in blue on your map here. This is just in sort of what is now the Balkans, Austria, this part of the world. So what you're looking at is there were some German tribes that crossed over the Rhine River. Some of them also crossed over the Danube on a different part of the map of the Roman Empire. These were tens of thousands of Germanic peoples. They pillaged Roman cities. They defeated Roman soldiers that had been guarding the border. They were able to defeat a Roman governor, and he died. But the most symbolically devastating thing that these Germanic invaders did is you follow the line all the way down to the red square. That red square at the lower left part of your screen is the city of Aquileia. Aquileia is in the province of Italy. So this was the first time in centuries that an Italian city was attacked by a foreign army. So this is all very, very urgent. The emergency became so urgent that both emperors eventually, after things subsided in Rome with the disease, made their way up to the north. They actually rallied to the city of Aquileia there. And began to gather a massive army to repel these Germanic invaders. Aquileia was a pretty good city strategically to begin this war. It was located near the front, near the border, near the river. There were a lot of veterans that already lived in that city, so they could be called on. It was just a natural staging place. There was a port at Aquileia, and then it was connected to the Roman road network such that you could get across the Alps there pretty easily. So all of these recruits are coming in to the city from across the Roman Empire, from the countryside, from the cities. At the same time, there are also a bunch of soldiers coming to the city who were veterans of the Parthian War. That is, the war in which the Antonine Plague may have first showed up in the first place. So you get some guys that have had the disease, some guys that may have the disease, and then a bunch of people that have never had this disease at all. They're immunologically naive. And the other guy that came to this city was Galen, the physician Galen. He was summoned by Marcus Aurelius to come. And you can probably guess what is going to happen next. Galen actually records it in a kind of journal of his called On His Own Books. This is what he says. On my arrival in Aquileia, there was an outbreak of the plague, which caused a destruction on a scale previously unknown. The emperors immediately fled to Rome with a small force of men. For the rest of us, survival became very difficult over a long period. The majority, in fact, died, the effects of the plague being compounded by the fact that all this was taking place in the middle of winter. Lucius Verus himself departed this world on the way back to Rome. So Galen is clearly terrified, and for good reason. Marcus and Lucius this time, they don't set up statues for the dead or pass laws on burials. They just get out of there. They've seen what happens when they were in Rome the last time the pandemic hit. They flee the city. They abandon the war again. And Galen is just sort of stuck in the city of Aquileia having to deal with the disease. And even those that escaped weren't able to actually flee the disease itself, because we read in the last sentence, the emperor Lucius Verus himself departed this world on the way back to Rome. So he died. Now, Galen doesn't say specifically that he died of whatever the disease was that was causing the Antonine Plague, but it's interesting that he connects that sentence to this passage on the plague. So we just are kind of left guessing. Now, from here, the plague, this disease would go on to affect numerous cities across the empire, from Egypt to Great Britain. Now, the evidence for this gets more and more difficult as we leave the literary sources. We have to look at proxy evidence. We have to look at evidence which may indicate disease. There could be other causes behind some of this evidence. There could be multiple causes behind what we're seeing in the evidence, but I'll show you what I mean. So this is a census record of the populations of numerous villages in Egypt. So you see that map there on the lower right of your screen. We're talking in the Nile Delta, so where the Nile kind of opens up right before it goes into the Mediterranean Sea. And the changes in the numbers of people in these small villages is pretty astounding. So these are poor rural villages. And we're seeing population declines over the from AD 159 to 160 to less than a decade later of 80, 90, 100% in some cases. Now, there's a lot going on at this time in Egypt, so I don't want to immediately call these plague deaths. There's poverty in the villages. There are bandits attacking these villages. There are fires. There are natural disasters. There are other things going on in the villages. But one source in particular about one of these villages does mention, quote, the pestilential situation. So clearly disease is part of this story all the way over in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. Let's go to the opposite side of the Roman Empire. Let's go all the way over to the island of Great Britain. So if we look at Roman London and we look at pottery shards, so what you're looking at on your screen right now are numbers of pottery shards, and we have thousands and thousands and thousands of these that were dated um, and by the decade. And so, things are humming along pretty normally up until we get to the 160s. And then the decade after, there's this precipitous drop in the number of pottery vessels found in the city of London. And then this decrease that we see from the 160s onward lasts as long as this archive does. This archive goes all the way to 400 AD, and the number of pottery vessels for any decade after 160 never goes back up again. There are studies of different archaeological sites in the city of London, which show that mills were abandoned, kilns stopped producing tiles and bricks, glass-making workshops shut down. There was a quarry on the east side of the city of London that fills in at this point. So London seems to have experienced a major change. Whole parts of the city appear to be abandoned. The earth itself changes from earth that's consistent with human populations and buildings and structures to earth that's consistent with just grass and bushes and trees growing. So and that's like 2/3 of the area of the city of London, the Roman London, that is covered with this dirt that suggests that part of the city was abandoned, and London would never recover. So you should have a pretty good sense at this point. I think I've really discussed like what the Antonine Plague was. Let me talk for a little bit about why the Roman Empire was so susceptible to this disease. And like I said, the irony here is that some of the things that made Rome strong were the exact things that made it susceptible to a disease. Its impressive connectivity, the military movements, the road network, the grain that was produced in Rome's provinces and the network for shipping that grain. These things actually became sources of instability when this pandemic was raging in the empire. So let's look at trade, for example. We don't know exactly how this disease makes its way into the Roman Empire. Maybe it came through the military in Parthia. Trade is certainly one possibility. As you can see, the Romans have trade networks that extend well outside of their territory. So via Egypt and the Red Sea, you can see these purple lines, and then the red lines that go out into the Indian Ocean, go down around into the east coast of Africa. Even China was linked to the Roman Empire via trade. And then, of course, there are the Silk Roads. So those are in green on your map. Caravans carried goods thousands of miles. And we know that diseases hitched rides along even the land routes because there are excavations of toilets along the route. And sure enough, there are parasites that are evidence of parasites that were moving thousands of miles over land. So clearly there's some capacity there for diseases to move across the Eurasian landmass in this way. So that trade is definitely a part of it. But like I said, I think the military also must have played a pretty important role, and the sources describe the military as playing an important role. There were 500,000 men in the Roman military. It was one of the largest armies in pre-industrial history. Just think about Roman military camps for a second. These are very cosmopolitan places. There are thousands of soldiers in these camps from every part of the Roman Empire. The Romans mixed their army up with people from all different origins. There were, of course, also dependent women and children and servants that marched with those soldiers. There were merchants, suppliers, messengers. There were prostitutes. There were just a variety of hangers-on to the Roman army. These were basically mobile Roman cities. And as these soldiers moved, especially if there were wars, and during the Antonine Plague, there were two major wars, one in Parthia that I've talked to you about, and then the other on the border of the Danube, the Marcomannic War. So for the Antonine Plague, there really was no better strategic conquest than the Roman legions. So I mentioned that the Antonine plague may have infected the soldiers in Persia. I actually ran some simulations for probable routes that those soldiers would take back to their bases, because we know where some of those soldiers came from, and we know at least one of the stops that they made. They all stopped in the city of Ephesus. So following Roman roads and sea routes, for the most part, these soldiers were kind of marching in a giant mass. They were very limited in the routes that they would have taken. So we've got thousands of people coming back from a war in which they may have caught some disease, and they make their way throughout Europe. Then, of course, the first wave of the Antonine plague hit Rome. This is happening in 166 in spring and summer. And by fall, winter of that same year, that outbreak in Rome occurs, where the bodies were being carted around in wagons. So there's trade, there's the military, but like I said, nature is also preparing the way for the Antonine plague. And this is something that the Romans probably didn't really understand. So like I said, thanks to studies of modern climate change, we have a pretty good sense of what was going on in climate in the Roman Empire. So we have tree rings, which you're seeing on your screen, and I'm sure you all know this, by their thickness, by their color. There are indicators of how much precipitation and sunlight may have fallen in a given precipitation may have fallen in sunlight in a given year, and that obviously affects the ring. And then if we look at to the picture to the right, these are ice cores. So in Greenland, every year, snow falls. It doesn't melt. It creates this compact layer of ice, and as that snow falls, it carries with it various particles that are in the atmosphere. And so you can drill these cores, and you can measure various atmospheric particles and pollutants over the course of thousands and thousands of years. So from proxies like these, we can learn a lot about what was going on in the climate of the Roman Empire. And we can compare it with local records. So just like, let me show you the local records first. So the Nile River, it floods every year, and the Nile feeds the fields of Egypt, and those fields then create the grain that feeds the city of Rome and the legions. And the floodwaters needed to reach a certain height in order to really water those fields. The height is between 16 and 14 cubits. So you see that area dotted on the graph there. And we have a lot of flood records from Egypt. And what you can see on the screen is that everything's pretty good. It's in that zone until about 150. And then there's a period of almost 25 years in which almost no floods are in that sweet spot. There's this huge drought, huge famine in Egypt. And if we just had this local evidence, that would be something. But we also have some climatological evidence. So these are, for example, tree rings that come from various parts of Europe. And the tree rings show us that actually there was a pretty substantial drought in Eurasia at this same time. So this standard, the zero represents sort of the average of this chart. And then you can see from about 150 to about 175, there's this kind of reduced amount of tree ring growth at this time, which suggests lower precipitation. So at the same time that crops in Egypt were likely failing due to drought, there were also crops failing in parts of Europe as well. So hopefully you've got a sense now of what the Antonine plague was and why it was susceptible. Trade, military, Mother Nature itself. So I just want to talk a little bit about how the Antonine plague contributed to the end of the Golden Age, the Pax Romana. So let's get to some more of these climatological proxies, because I think we can see it pretty well in these. Recently, just in the last few years, there was a team composed of some scientists, some archaeologists, and historians. They pulled a new set of cores, ice cores, from Greenland, showing thousands of years of lead emissions. They were interested in measuring lead. The reason for this is because when Roman mines and mints smelted silver, the product of that, the pollutant of smelting silver, is primarily lead and atmospheric lead. It wafts into the atmosphere. The wind patterns would have carried that right to Greenland. It would have fallen with that snow, and you can measure trace amounts of lead in those cores. And sure enough, if we look at the lead emissions found in those Greenland ice cores, there is a noticeable decline right at 165 AD, right when the Antonine Plague begins. And then it is sort of permanent. The lead levels are permanently low. If I were to extend this chart even to the time of Charlemagne, the lead levels would not recover to what they were prior to the Antonine Plague. So this suggests that silver smelting, so this would be like coin minting, some mining activity as well, probably stopped or shut or slowed considerably during the time of the Antonine Plague, consistent with it. What else happens? Well, maybe because he was not able to mine new sources of silver and therefore mint new money, the Roman Empire went into a fiscal crisis. Now, what does Marcus Aurelius do? He's in the middle of a war. He needs money. What it says is Marcus had drained the treasury for this war. He could not bring himself to impose any new tax on the provincials. So what does he do? He has a garage sale, of course, in the Roman Forum. He sells the imperial furniture and the silverware, goldware, I guess we could say. He sells his wife's clothes. Not sure if she was happy about that, but either way, he sold some jewels. And he did this for 2 months. So it was not just like a normal weekend garage sale where you make a few bucks. This was a sale to fund a war because he did not have the silver to pay his soldiers. What else do we see happening? Well, the silver content of the coins eventually suffers. So what you're looking at right now is the amounts of silver in the Roman silver coins. So you can see it's pretty steady at between 2.4 and 2.8 grams all the way to the time of the Antonine Plague. There's a little bit of a dip and then a short recovery. If I were to put the Nile flood record over the top of this, by the way, it would correlate pretty strongly with that rise, dip, and then brief rise again. And then by the time we get to when I think is probably the end of this pandemic, which is around the mid-170s, the empire just does not recover. Mines are not able to be reopened. They've flooded. It's a really economically a very terrible situation for the Romans, and the debasement of the coinage follows. And there is price inflation after this. Prices go up by double what they were prior to the Antonine Plague. The Roman silver coin, which is called the denarius, had been a stable coin for almost 400 years prior to this point. It had been its silver content had not changed that much over that 400-year period. But with the calamities that occurred during the age of the Antonine Plague, the monetary system of the Roman Empire, which had been a bedrock of the Mediterranean, finally began to falter. So there's more that I could say, and I don't want to end on a complete downer. So I just want to leave you with a little bit of silver lining. Marcus Aurelius began with the beginning of his rule in 161 AD. He would live until the year 180 AD. So he had almost 20 years of power. And during that entire time, this pandemic was a constant companion of his. And near the end of his life, he began to journal his philosophical thoughts. These survive in a collection called The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. I encourage you to read them. They're very interesting and insightful. These notes that he wrote to himself give us a little glimpse inside of his mind, the mind of a man who ruled Rome at the end of a golden age. And it seems like he kind of knew that. The Meditations are filled with these notes reminding Marcus that he should be sober-minded and he should be courageous, even though there are calamities going on around him. Now, he only references pestilence one time in the entire 12 books of the Meditations. This is what he says. Has experience not yet persuaded you to flee from the pestilence of falsehood, pretense, luxury, and pride? For corruption of the mind is a far graver pestilence than any comparable disturbance and alteration in the air that surrounds us. For the one is a plague to living creatures as mere animals, and the other to human beings in their nature as human beings. Marcus is realizing that he was not able to rescue the Roman Empire. There were problems that were just too pernicious. They were too systemic. But what he could do was face the end of the golden age with bravery and dignity. I have to think that sickness took a lot of people that he knew, took soldiers that he knew, took friends that he knew. I'm sure some of those statues in Rome were to his friends. May have even taken members of his family. Marcus Aurelius lost more than half of his 14 children before they were adults. Maybe the plague took his co-emperor Lucius Verus. Who knows? But at this point, at least, Marcus is reflecting on death, what it is and what it isn't, that a courageous person should face the only sure thing about life, and that is that it ends. But at least let one's life end with character and honesty and humility and authenticity. With that, I'll go ahead and finish. I think we were hit 8 o'clock, and I want to make sure to leave time for questions. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you for that really fascinating lecture. Dr. Dick Daffner's actually put our first question in the chat. Can you tell us when burial superseded cremation as a way of handling the dead bodies?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know. I don't have a precise answer for you. I could speak generally. So the Romans, at least the elites, practice kind of both cremation and burial. That is, they cremate the bodies of their loved ones, and then they bury the ashes. Christianity clearly has a major influence on this. So Christians, even early Christians, believe in a bodily resurrection. So they do not want to have bodies cremated. So as Christianity becomes increasingly prominent, and by the way, Christians do very well during the Antonine Plague and the subsequent pandemics in the Roman Empire, burial seems to become increasingly prominent. So yeah, when I'm describing burial during the Antonine Plague, I'm actually referring to, in some cases, the burial of ashes. However, we do have catacombs that are not Christian catacombs, but that do hold bodies in Rome that do date from prior to the Christianization of the Roman Empire. So it does appear that the Romans also would at times bury their dead intact without cremating them as well. But that seems to be a very as far as I can tell, that seems to be a very gradual change, and Christianity plays a big role in that.
Interesting. And then we have a hand raised. If Yanni, you want to answer or state your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So great talk, Dr. Elliott. I had two questions in mind. One, I was kind of curious about just the Christianity and the polytheism. So would it be considered just kind of a catalyst to Romans converting to Christianity versus polytheism, like during that time, the Antonine Plague, or would that be one catalyst?
I think it does have an effect. It's hard to measure it because our sources don't tell us all that much. But very briefly, I'll say that Christians had pre-existing institutions for dealing with death. So they are able to, they have a burial society. They have they visit widows and orphans of people that die. They take collections for members of the church, at the very least. It may have been more general charity as well, but at least members of the church were often covered when their family members died. So all of those institutions are there and ready to go when the Antonine plague hits. So Christians have a distinct advantage. Even though they're dying probably in the same numbers as everybody else, they have these mechanisms to sort of provide care for each other. I have to think that that may have won some people over. Now, at the same time, the Christians are dealing with the stigma of the disease as well, which is, for the Romans, disease is not really just medical. It's, in fact, largely religious. If a disease is occurring, it's because the gods are very angry. So who is not worshiping the gods appropriately to cause this anger? Well, the Christians would be one such group. So it's kind of a mixed bag for Christians, but so maybe not in just this pandemic, but if we look over this pandemic and what happens in the third century, there's another pandemic. The church grows during that period. So at the beginning of the Antonine plague, estimates are that there may be 40, 50,000 Christians in the entire Roman Empire. By the time we get to the end of the third century, so 120, 130 years later, we're getting at almost 1 million Christians in the Roman Empire. So yeah, I have to think that what happened in the plague ultimately may have helped their numbers. Really good question.
All right, I'm going to try and take these in order. Annie asked, what role did Lucius Verus play in Rome at the time of the plague?
Yeah, and since I see there are a lot of questions, I'll try to answer these succinctly because I know people want to get in. So Lucius Verus is mentioned in that source, the Augustan history, as being a part of the laws against sort of inappropriate burials, and his name does show up in the legal collections that we have from the 6th century. So he's clearly doing that. As for any other role that he plays, we don't know. His name isn't mentioned, and I don't want to besmirch Lucius Verus's character, but I will say that the sources aren't very kind to him. They describe him as kind of a party animal. So if that is the way that his character really was, he may have very well been helping to spread the plague or other diseases. Who knows? So Marcus sort of gets the hero treatment in the Antonine plague, whereas Lucius Verus is described only as helping with the laws and then fleeing the plague along with Marcus from Aquileia, and then he eventually dies. So that's the short answer.
Okay, I think Andy Herlick, you were next.
Was there a precipitous decline in birth rate? And was there a precipitous increase in genetic malformations as a result of this process?
This is a fantastic question, and I'm afraid that the demographic information that we have for the Roman Empire at this time is just too fragmented to really answer that question sufficiently. So there, or at least certainly like quantitatively, qualitatively speaking, or just sort of, impressionistically speaking, there have been numerous historians that believe that at least in the aftermath of the Antonine plague, it may have been the case that there would have been an increase in birth rates, that there would have been kind of a baby boom following this disease, as there was so much it's just there's just huge losses of population, and then there's this natural demand. There are resources available for people to have more children and all of that. So potentially there is an increase in the birth rate, although we just have to kind of guess at this in some ways. So population levels in the Roman Empire are very difficult to tell. And then how did you describe like birth defects, those kinds of things? Again, this is sort of a challenge. The Romans are very interested in anything what they might consider abnormal of bodies. And it is kind of remarkable that there is not a description, or at least like I don't notice any quantitative or qualitative change in like sources talking about these kinds of things. So who knows what that means? Because again, the quantitative data is non-existent. But from what I have read of scholars that study Roman literary descriptions of these sorts of, defects and just different bodily differences, I don't think that there is anything significant in the signal there.
I'll follow that up with Dave Feingold's question, which is also about genetics. Is there any study ongoing to look at ancient DNA from the burial grounds?
Yes. And this is some really exciting stuff. Now, for the Antonine plague, there are some burials in one of the catacombs in Rome that very much appear to date from the Antonine plague. I don't think that those have yet been mined for DNA evidence, but scholars are doing this with other remains. So, for example, in some Viking era remains, so a little bit later, there have been genetic traces of a orthopox virus of some kind, not smallpox, but maybe a cousin or something like that of smallpox that has since gone extinct, was found in some of those remains. And this is probably not the disease that was responsible for the Antonine plague, because it's like the earliest possible date for that disease, I think, was 4th century AD. But I think there's a lot of demand for that kind of research. And I have to think that if this disease was a pox virus, which would leave behind some genetic evidence, maybe within 5 years or 10 years, there could be something found, in which case I guess I'll have to write the sequel to the book.
That'd be cool. Next up is Donna Harsh, please. Oh, we have to get you unmuted.
Yeah. Hi, thank you very much for that extremely interesting talk. I'm thinking of the plague in the 14th century.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you don't know comparable percentages of population, but there, the evidence is that over time, the loss of population benefited the lower orders,
Right.
and led to some real social changes in terms of land holding and that kind of stuff. And I'm wondering if in this case there's any evidence of that occurring.
Donna, that's a great question. And yes, so now again, the evidence is very scattered, but in Egypt, there's a decent amount of papyrus documents that have been preserved. And these include things like land contracts, sales of land, leases of land, those sorts of things. And sure enough, land prices plummet in the aftermath of this plague, which of course makes land more accessible for people who did not originally have it. So that seems to be one potential benefit for the survivors dealing with this disease. So yeah, I think I suspect that there are a lot of comparisons to be made with plague and the experience of plague in medieval Europe and Roman pandemics like the Antonine plague and the Cyprianic plague.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Ryan McConnell, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, thanks for a great talk. When you listed the symptoms or that were recorded of this pandemic, especially bloody stool, it made me wonder what were the public hygiene practices like at the time in a city like Rome, and then also in like a military camp.
Oh boy.
Thanks
yeah,
for
Ryan,
the talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I won't make you lose your dinner. The first chapter of the book really goes into kind of gruesome detail about this. So Roman sanitation measures are very, very poor. They're so bad that when you compare Roman skeletons, like femur lengths of Roman skeletons, versus people that lived in the same part of the world, just in the not Roman era, the Romans were about 10 centimeters shorter than other people that lived in the same place, just in a different time, not in the Roman context. And that probably is due in large part to just the tremendous disease, bacteria, parasitic burden in Roman cities. So Roman baths are not clean. Roman baths are not chlorinated. Roman bath water does not cycle. These are stagnant, lukewarm ponds that if you are sick at all, the doctor will send you to the public bath and have you go and wash in the public bath. And if you're gangrenous, you need to go and wash in the public bath. If you are a prostitute that cannot afford to have your own place, you are going to do business with patrons in the public bath. So, like the Roman sewers, these are not sewers in the modern sense. They're basically overflow control for when the Tiber floods. And when the Tiber floods, whatever is stuffed down that sewer comes up. The graffiti in Roman cities, especially Pompeii, is where we have the most graffiti, is constantly either telling people not to or people bragging about defecating in public. So I'll stop because again, I want everybody to hang on to what the contents of their stomach, but the opportunity for disease, bacteria, parasites, fecal oral maladies is very high in Roman cities, especially Rome. Rome is a city of over 1 million people smushed into a population density that is greater than currently the most dense city in the world, District 1 of Manila. Ancient Rome had a denser population than that. So all of that, plus all those people crammed into one spot, it's nasty. I promised I'd be short, so I'll stop. Other questions? That's a good one.
That was a great question. So Dick Daffner is going to ask our last question of the night.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Yeah, when you presented some of the symptoms and signs that were presented, the idea of a lot of bleeding, makes me think, was this some kind of an early form of Ebola, which is very contagious, spreads very rapidly?
Yes. So there is an argument for that. There have been a few scholars, my colleague and friend Kyle Harper, who also wrote a great book on sort of disease and environment in the ancient world. He doesn't definitively suggest Ebola, but he does list it as a possibility. So, and I think, maybe you could tell me, Dick, does Ebola account for the pustular rash? Is that a potential symptom of Ebola?
I am not sure. I'm a radiologist.
Oh, okay.
Because interested in history.
Okay, so and that's I think the pustular rash is one of the things that tended to lead historians towards a pox virus. But if there is a rash associated with Ebola, and I don't know, just like you, I don't know very much about Ebola. If that's the case, then maybe that's one reason why at least some scholars have suspected that disease.
All right. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there after a really engaging talk and Q&A session. Thank you all for coming and for your attendance. Find us on social media and follow us. Check your email. We'll be announcing our next speakers soon. And have a great night.
Thank you again to our
everybody.
Wonderful speaker for his excellent talk tonight, and we hope to see you all this fall.
And wash your hands, you filthy animals.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Kristen, could I ask you real quick, and maybe even some of the people here? I just realized that I have a Pittsburgh connection. He was in the biology department. I don't know if anyone knows Jason Cousins Walsman. Anyone work with a postdoc there at Pitt? He's a friend of mine.
Doesn't ring a bell, but I'm pretty siloed in the medical school myself.
Okay, all right.
I'm afraid I'm not acquainted with anyone by that name.
Okay, I didn't know if there was anybody who knew him, because he does kind of maybe swim in your circles, but it sounds like not. All right.
Cool. Will you be at Buffalo?
What's happening at Buffalo? Sorry.
Oh, the AHM, the American Association for the History of Medicine meeting.
I have never gone to that meeting. Maybe I should at some point. I've never thought to do so.
Yeah. I'll be frank, there's not a whole lot of ancient or even medieval content these days. It tends to be a lot of 20th century US, but I know Adam and I are always rooting for some chronological diversity.
Yeah, well, I'll remember that. That I have not thought to. Is it in Buffalo every year or just this year?
No, just this year. Like the Southern Association for the History of Medicine, both of those meetings move every single year.
Okay. What time of year does that meeting tend to be?
So SAMS is going to be like March, and AHM is usually April, May. They kept
Okay.
scheduling it on Mother's Day and getting a lot of flack for that. So we're at the University of Buffalo the first weekend in June this year because it was
Okay.
cheap. They're putting us up in the student dorms.
Okay, you're really selling it.
Yeah.
Although
Now,
June
I will.
Buffalo, if you were going to say like February in Buffalo, that would be an automatic no. But June maybe is doable.
Yeah.
Now, Kristen and I are co-chairing SAMS in Pittsburgh for next year. And SAMS historically does tend to have some ancient and medieval content. I would love to see you come and present something at SAMS. I think
Okay.
that that would be absolutely tremendous. And that will be in early March of next year. So I sincerely hope that you will come and join us there. We almost always have an ancient and medieval panel.
Okay. And remind me of what is Southern.
Southern Association for the History of Medicine and Science. I will drop that name into the chat right now for you.
Yeah. All right.
Or I could just forward you the email I sent out last night, which has all this info.
Okay, that
That
would
would
be
also
yeah, that'd be fantastic, Kristen. I'd love to have that. It's great to yeah, it would be great to connect with some of the folks at a meeting like that. That would be wonderful.
And in turn, if you could also forward us an address that I can send your honorarium to, I would
Oh,
appreciate that
sure, of
tremendously.
course. Do you want me
I
to
think
send an
he put
email
it
with
in
that?
the AV form, so if you
Oh,
can't find that in the Google Drive, then I will pull it out for you.
Okay, much appreciated, and I'll get that out to you tomorrow.
okay.
Great. Cool. This was amazing. What a great way to close out our year. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, it
Loved
was
it
a real pleasure.
tremendously. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. It was really an honor to be invited, and it's especially cool that the lecture is named after an IU alum. So just that was very poetic. I thought that was nice.
Yeah,
I wish
John Erlen was the heart and soul of the Reynolds Society for decades, and we're sorry he's gone.
Yeah.
he was my mentor. He was my good friend. I miss him dearly. I'm holding the office he used to hold in this organization now, and every time I'm here, I feel like I can never possibly fill his shoes.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a real
All right.
honor. So thanks again, and yeah, I appreciate you thinking of me. And I thought this went really well.
It
Me
did.
too. All right. Good night.
Excellent.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Do we